What's up, everybody? Ryan Thomas, live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, bringing you the latest edition of the Thomas Take, and very happy to kick off today's show live from One Buffalo, New York, in regards to a topic that really circulated around the national media today, and that was Oscar De La Hoya and Dana White. Oscar De La Hoya has already started throwing little shots here and there at Dana. Dana's, throwing some counters verbally. This is all verbal. This is all a verbal war. But today, among any other day, Dana White goes to ESPN. He bounces back, claps back at some of the chatter towards him from Oscar De La Hoya, and really just calling Oscar De La Hoya a liar and a druggie and a cokehead and things like that. Dana's already said those things, but this time Dana was actually on the defensive side due to the fact that Oscar De La Hoya really talked a lot of stuff about Dana White not paying the fighters, respectively, what they deserve. And that has been a sentiment within Dana White, within the UFC for quite a long time, that it doesn't quite pay the fighters what they deserve. I've said that. Many others have said that has been a narrative heading into, each and every UFC year, the last, 17, 18 years, that the UFC doesn't pay their fighters what they should be paid. They don't give the fighters an opportunity to make realistic money on each and every night that they fight. Really, there's the top 1%, and then there's everybody else. That's not really the case with boxing currently. You have a lot of fighters making plenty of money, millions and millions of dollars, where in the UFC you have championship fighters that aren't getting paid millions and millions of dollars. So Oscar does have some legs to stand on. I am not on either end. I'm not on either side, but the timing that Oscar De La Hoya decided to go after Dana White for his lack of fighter pay is very, very curious to me, very odd to me, because Oscar De La Hoya is using former fighters that fought in the UFC to fight under his banner, that are far too old to be fighting, that have no business being in the octagon any longer, but he uses that to save face. He uses Dana White's inability to pay his fighters the right amount of money to add to his narrative. Oh, well, I had Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz only fight each other because they didn't make the money that they should have been paid. Well, they shouldn't have even been fighting. That's the real crux of the whole thing, is that health-wise, neither Chuck or Tito should have been in there fighting the fights that they fought the few weekends ago. So that's the way I saw that. And now that Dana White has really responded with true facts, true numbers on his end that I will not dispute because they seemed very legitimate, as far as the money that they paid Chuck Liddell, as far as the money that they paid Tito Ortiz. Will I say the one defense that Dana White has is that at that point when Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz were fighting in their heyday, the UFC was nowhere near as big as it is now. If you took a Chuck Liddell from back then and a Tito Ortiz from back then and put them in today's current UFC, they would be making millions and millions of dollars. But that wasn't the case. The sport was still in its infancy. The sport was still very young. Really, the Fertitta brothers, Lorenzo and Frank, along with Dana White, had only purchased and owned the company for 3 years. So they really had to climb out of the gutter that Bob Meyrowitz and SCG Entertainment put the UFC in order to really gain some respectability. And as those fighters got older, they got paid a little bit more here and there, and some of them even left the UFC, and Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell ended up being forced into retirement due to the fact that he had been knocked out cold his last 3 fights, but during those last 3 fights, he made upwards of $2 million in a 3-fight span. So, and Chuck completely agreed with everything that Dana White actually said. So I feel like round 1 went to Oscar De La Hoya in the verbal battle. He had some legs to stand on, but when Dana White came back and clapped back with some facts, that's when we really saw who was really in their own mind, in their own headspace within this debate. And now Oscar de la Hoya has clapped back and said that he would like to fight Dana White. They played the clip on the Luke Thomas show, and it stated the following, that that Dana White said as far as some of the things that he doesn't like from Oscar de la Hoya. And Dana White said all these things, and then Oscar de la Hoya says, wow, he sounds really frustrated. He sounds really upset. Maybe we should get in there and fight. And I know one thing. I would like to see it. I would like to see Dana White get in a boxing ring and fight. I think it'd be hilarious. I'd like to see Oscar de la Hoya at his old age get in there and fight. That would get my $39.99. Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz 3 did not. So if Oscar de la Hoya is trying to poach two old fighters into another event, well, he might be one half of that main event, and he just might get the $39.99 that he asked for from Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz that only 20,000 people, if that, decided to pay for. I guarantee you 20,000 or more would buy Oscar de la Hoya versus Dana White. I guarantee it. More people would buy that fight than Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz. People love circus acts. People love to see two guys that have no business being in there as a true spectacle. One guy, a champion boxer, Hall of Fame boxer. The other guy, a corporate loudmouth, CEO, president of a company that has oftentimes teased us with his boxing capabilities that he believes that he has. Put your money where your mouth is, and let's see where Dana's capabilities are. At one point, Dana actually almost fought Tito Ortiz, if you guys don't remember that. If you guys don't remember that, I will just let you guys take that in and laugh at that for a minute, that Dana White almost allowed Tito Ortiz and him to fight. So that's how I see that. That's just unbelievable. But this is fun. This is fun for boxing. This is fun for MMA because Dana White already dipped his toes into that water with Floyd versus Conor. And that's really where this whole thing started. Oscar de la Hoya blasted that fight and said that fight was not legitimate, was not good enough, did not need to happen. And yet, here we are, over a year since, and that fight is looked back on with fond memories between Floyd and Conor. Nobody has much bad things to say about it. It was a good event. It was fun. It was crazy that it even happened, but it was great business for both sides, for Floyd's side and for Conor and for Dana, everybody. It was a great day at the office for everyone. So Oscar de la Hoya, I felt, was a little salty that he wasn't in on that action, that he didn't get the piece of the pie for that at all, but that really was what stemmed this back and forth bitter rivalry between Oscar and Dana White, who not so long ago seemed to be on decent terms, but I think Oscar really sticking his nose, pun intended, in the business of Dana White was really what led Dana White to come back at him and say the things that he said about him, which I don't really agree with. Him saying the things that he said. Everybody knows about Oscar de la Hoya's past, and it's not really cool to do that. Granted, I just did moments ago, and I apologize for that. But we have to have a little humor on the show. We can't just completely gloss over this without completely laughing our asses off. But at the same time, I think that Dana is going to further himself in the world of boxing, whereas Oscar de la Hoya is going to further himself in the world of MMA. When one man comes into another man's house and then the other man goes into the other man's house, you're going to have some friction. And I feel like that's what is taking place. Dana entering the boxing world, as well as Oscar de la Hoya entering the MMA world. You're going to have some friction, and I realistically think that is what is happening right now. The boxing world, the MMA world, the fight game is much, much different than that of football, baseball, anything else. It's very independent. It's very commercial now more than ever. And you have some real big-name boxers, some real big-name MMA fighters as combat sports has really grown these last 20 years. Combat sports as a whole, with the growth of MMA and with the topsy-turvy roller coaster ride that has been the last almost 20 years in boxing, now rearing its head with HBO pay-per-view no longer covering boxing whatsoever. HBO completely done. Jim Lampley, Max Kellerman, Roy Jones Jr., that broadcast team is done, at least on HBO. We'll see what happens, and I want to give a shout-out to Jim Lampley. He's always been an idol of mine. I've always really admired his ability to commentate fights, call fights, great voice, great just intangibles on the microphone, his ability to just illustrate a fight before our very eyes while watching it or while listening to his commentary. You could literally illustrate the fight, paint a picture for yourself with his voice, and that's the goal of every single commentator in the game. You know, if I had ever had a commentating gig previous years, I always tried to think of it as if someone was listening to my voice right now, as you guys are, am I painting a picture for you? Whether it's the things I say, the opinions I state, or in commentating, telling the story. And Jim Lampley has always done a really good job of that. He's been one of the guys that I've tried to emulate in my commentating career. And he's somebody that I really have deep admiration for. And to see him like that at the end of that show the other night, it was very sad, very tough. I do think he'll have another job at some point. ESPN is really upping their coverage of combat sports, whether it's boxing or MMA. I hope ESPN gives Jim Lampley a call. He deserves the opportunity there. But back to the subject matter. Do I think Oscar De La Hoya and Dana White will fight? Hell no, I do not. But would they get my $39.99? Hell yes. I'm Ryan Thomas. It was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Take care.